Hi everyone, I'm Josh. Welcome to Strange Adventures, and today what we're going to do is go through the combat rules for Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, because I've had a lot of requests since I went through some other rules, which you can find here, because apparently it's a little bit confusing, and I understand that. I had trouble with it when it was going to. So today I'm going to go through mostly the basic combat that you can find on page 123 in the core rulebook. Couple of things you can do with the advanced combat, and then some of my suggestions for homebrew to speed things up or to tweak things and make combat a little bit more dynamic. Now, conflict in the book is described as a narrative first system, one where you can do anything. There are no set moves or requirements. You don't have to, as a GM, balance encounters. If they decide to take on the prince, who's like 5th generation or something ridiculous, they're probably going to get stomped unless they have a really good plan in place. But as a horror game with political implications for combat, this is a narrative first situation where describing your characters and NPCs' movements is the more important part, and what you should probably, or like what the core book recommends you spend most of your time doing. Obviously, people can have fun with like trying to decide different weird tactics, like doing an elbow like drop from 100 stories up or something ridiculous. No one's going to stop your players from doing that. But this is... It's kind of a fluffy system where the core rules support you doing damage, they support you taking advantage of situations, but they don't prescribe any specific narrative results, aside from perhaps some of the powers, but we'll get onto those later because the basic conflict rules don't sort of mention them at all, which is kind of annoying, but I've got ideas for that. They'll come later. So, there's no specific time limit for a round. There is no limit for what conflict can be described as. It can be social, it can be manipulative, it can be a long conversation over dinner where you're trying to one-up someone. But more commonly, and perhaps more... likely in some situations, it will be a physical fight to achieve a goal, whether that's to lockpick a safe while you're being attacked by guards or something like that, or you're trying to overpower a rival gang in a nearby domain for your vampires to like expand their borders or something like that. It will more likely be combat. So we're going to go through all of them, and all of these rules apply to both, aside from, I guess, ranged combat and initiative. Initiative doesn't really exist, sort of. It does. It really does, but it's very different in this system. So I will finally get on to explaining the exact rules of what the rundown of the things you need to do are. I've written this down, and I'm also going to be illustrating it, so if I'm not looking at the camera, that's because I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm getting the notes. Right. Initiative begins with the turn. The turn is a period of time that can range from 3 seconds to 3 hours, and the turn represents one action for each of the players and NPCs. You begin the turn by everyone stating what it is they intend to do. So, for instance, one player could be deciding to shoot a sniper guard on a tower. Another player could be trying to sneak round through the door. Another player could be trying to mesmerize an important contact to do what they want. Meanwhile, you as the GM will, or the ST, I guess, in this system will be saying exactly what it is your NPCs will be doing. And for instance, the one on the tower will be trying to call out the positions of each of your players. They will be trying to fight back, like clock the player in the face. And another one will be trying to shoot kill and hurt. And now that all of your players and NPCs have those goals in mind, you decide as an ST what those are represented by for the dice pool. So, for instance, sneaking would be something like dexterity plus stealth, or perhaps composure plus stealth if they're staying in one place for an extended period of time. Or the sniper would be perhaps composure plus firearms, or if they're moving around a lot, it would be dexterity plus firearms, or it can be any combination of an attribute, the ones at the top, and a skill, the ones at the bottom. If you want to, like using a thing from earlier, lockpick a safe in a combat time kind of scenario, that would probably be either composure, or if you're trying to rip the door off, strength plus larceny. I don't know. It is entirely up to your players to decide what they're doing, and then you give them the dice pool for it. So at that point, you decide who goes where. And there is an initiative system for this. They don't call it initiative. They say they don't have initiative. In some places, they do. And so here you decide who goes first. It begins with already initiated melee combat. Apologies for my writing. Melee, this means close combat. This doesn't mean, for instance, there is a skill called melee. That's fighting with a weapon. It's not that specifically. It is close in, shooty, bang, bang, smashy, crashy, fighting between two people that are already really close and have started to wail on each other or try and dodge each other, for instance. Once the initiated melee combatants have gone, it is the ranged combatants, whether that is throwing a knife, whether that is sniping someone, shooting someone with a handgun, or shouting really far. I don't know. These are... The next one is newly initiated close combat. New melee means that you previously weren't right next to each other and fighting, whether that was before or after the combat round started. So you move into position and then you're going to make a smackdown. So it kind of gives ranged combat an advantage over people that need to close a distance. But if you've managed to wheel and deal your way to get close to an enemy, then you can start right away, way ahead of the people who have the guns. The final section is for those who are doing everything else. So, like I said, if you're trying to pick a safe or break in somewhere or sneak, those are the positions which take a lower priority to, I guess, the more high-octane, faster-moving combat sections of the initiative turn. That means everything else happens afterward. So I have suggestions for how to mix this up. For instance, if people are using powers, or if they have ideas that sort of cover things that aren't specified in the rulebook. I'll get onto those later. But this is, if you need no other instruction, this is where everything else goes. If the player is doing anything else, I don't know, trying to summon a dragon, I have no idea. The game suggests that if you are trying to break ties, then you use a dex plus wits roll, dexterity plus wits, to see who goes first if there's two melee combatants. But here's the fun part. Let's go on to the roll contests. Now, like I said, if there's two people doing two different things, you roll dex plus wits to see who goes first. So on the right here, Aaron is trying to shoot. That's a gun. Trying to shoot Billy. Darren is trying to shoot Connor. There we go. Those two people, Aaron and Darren, I forgot what I called them already, are both trying to shoot. So A and D would both roll dex plus wits to see which happens first, which might be important depending on whether people have negatives applied to their rolls. But in another instance of combat, let's go with Fiona is trying to knife. Fiona's trying to knife her. Who should we go with? Elijah. But what is that? Is this a fist? That's a fist. Elijah is trying to punch Fiona over here. And in that instance, those two are right next to each other. So they would go either on the new melee turn if they just started, or on the already initiated melee turn. But this is the cool bit I like about this system a lot. Because they're fighting each other, they roll a contest. They don't roll dodge. They don't roll to see if one goes first, because they're both fighting at the same time on the same initiative turn, which means Fiona would roll, say, 5 dice for her melee skill. That would probably be a dexterity or strength melee, because she's stabby. And then Elijah, was it? Alyssa, something, would be rolling, say, 6 dice for her strength plus brawl roll. And that is all you need to do. So we roll our dice, and Fiona gets, on a 6 and up, she gets 1, 7, and 9. She gets 2 successes, and that's good. And then Elijah gets an extra dice, and we get, that is a 10... 3 successes. The one with the higher dice pool gets 3 successes. And hang on, I'm going to write this down so it's perfectly clear what's happening. S is successes. We get 2, and then we get successes of 3 here, which means that to calculate damage, which is the next step, you use the margin between the two. So Fiona lost, which means that she doesn't do any damage, and Elijah punched Fiona for a margin of 1, which means that Elijah does 1, in this case it would be superficial damage. Sup. Combat maths is weird. Plus, whatever her potence might be, whether she had knuckle dusters to do extra damage, that can be bonus. Bon. And normally in this game, it can be anywhere from 0 to 3 as a bonus damage. And from there, I've skipped ahead quite a lot through this situation, but I think it makes more sense if I follow one to its conclusion. Let's go and investigate an alternate history where Fiona and Elijah both got 2 successes. What a coincidence. I didn't roll. And both of them got an equal amount of successes. What happens then? Well, in that fun instance, they both take 1 superficial damage, plus the bonuses. Another alternate history where pigs can fly. Perhaps Fiona was not stabbing, Fiona was dodging. And Fiona, for some reason, has a dodge pool of 8, whereas Elijah is still fighting with 6 dice to punch. In that scenario, if they get the same amount or Elijah wins, Fiona takes damage, but because Fiona is dodging, if they get the same amount or if she wins, Elijah does no harm, or takes no harm, more specifically, because you can't hit someone while you're dodging. Makes sense. There are multiple scenarios here we need to consider. So, for instance, if A was shooting B, then I would rule this a contest, and B shoots their firearms dice pool, A shoots their firearms dice pool, and whoever gets the highest would deal the damage. But, for instance, if A was being shot, hang on, by, let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this entirely. A was being shot, and A wanted to knife someone. Well, the ranged combat goes first. So it's not a contest, but A still gets a dice pool. Let's go with this order of operations. So 1, B shoots A, because B did it first on the initiative roll to see who goes first with the dex wits, which means that B is rolling composure plus firearms versus A's dex plus athletics to dodge. There are possible modifiers for this. For example, cover is a big one. That's gone straight over my face. If there's cover involved, it can be anywhere from a -2 for not cover to a +3 for super concrete, incredible, impenetrable cover. And that would affect the dodge dice pool of A. Aaron seems to be in a lot of trouble. So what we do next is Connor. Connor is shooting Aaron, which Aaron doesn't like because, like before, Connor would fire the composure plus firearms or whatever particular dice pool the ST sets versus the dexterity plus athletics of Aaron, but that is at a -1. Why? Why, we ask? Because the -1 comes from a successive dodge roll. Anything that you do versus an attack that isn't a contest, that isn't your action that turn. So let's say that Aaron starts with 6 dice to dodge. They would end up with 5 dice to dodge because they're dodging a second attack. If someone else fought them with something else, that would then, for a third attack, go down to 4 because it's -2, then it's -3, 4. Like if you're getting ganged up on, it can wear down your dice pool, basically. But let's just stick with 2 attacks for now because I've already illustrated the thing that happens, which is you get minuses to your dodge pool. 3, Aaron finally gets revenge and wants to kniff. Oh God, my blooming writing's everywhere. I apologize if this is bad, everyone. Let me know if you've got any questions in the comments, and hopefully the community will help you with that. I can't obviously get to all of the questions because there's lots of them, but I will do my best to help in this video. Anyway, Aaron gets revenge on Connor. Aaron's gonna knife, shank. So Aaron does the contest versus... which would be, I'm going to say, strength plus melee, because they're using a weapon, versus Connor's dexterity athletics, because Connor's just going to dodge. Connor just said they're going to dodge. And that wouldn't be at a negative, and neither would Aaron's, because despite having worn down their defense, the negatives for successive defensive attacks do not apply to the roll that you do. Various environmental factors, like we said, it's a narrative first kind of game. So if, for instance, you're super fast and you get the drop on someone, Connor doesn't see you coming when you suddenly blink from place to place. Or if you come from an unexpected direction, if you did a setup, someone setting you up, or you set yourself up from a previous action and Connor doesn't see what's happening, then you get a bonus maybe. Or if there's like debris everywhere and it's hard to move and shank, or it can be plus or minuses depending on the situation to give you bonuses. Or what's the opposite of a bonus? Malus? A problem. And continuing with the theme of multiple enemies, Aaron can split the dice pool. You get 1 action per turn. Everyone always gets only 1 action, and that is because if you want to fight B and C at the same time, you can fight just C with your knife, and that is your full dice pool. But if you want to take on both of them, if you think they're weak, or if you think that you really need to distract both of them and take so they take minuses to their dice pools, then you can fight both of them. That allows you to split your dice pool. Say that is 6 for A, A has 6 dice, and you can either split it 3 and 3, or you can do it 2 and 4, or you can do it 5 and 1 if you're really confident. It's up to you how you split your dice pool, but it is still an option if you're taking on more than one person. The contest is done. Aaron and Billy have at each other with knives, and that means that they did a contest and one of them won. Let's say Aaron's had it pretty rough this entire video. Aaron wins with 1 success, which means that we now calculate damage. So let's say that Billy is a vampire. That means that if Aaron does a total of, because they got a knife, they get +2 damage. That's 3 damage right there. 1 + 2 equals 3. Vampires, if this is superficial damage, which is marked as, if you got your health bar here, like that. It's a little sideways stroke. That means that you halve superficial damage. Superficial damage is halved for vampires, but this is 3 damage right here, which means that we round up. So instead of taking 3, we would take 2. Instead of taking 4, a vampire would take 2. Mortals don't have superficial or aggravated damage. Aggravated is an X, superficial is a slash. But this is Billy right here. So just to completely explain health trackers for you, whether that is willpower or whether that is health, because both can take damage, whether you're spending willpower or whether you are losing a debate if you take damage, superficial or aggravated. When it fills up with superficial like this, Billy takes a -2 to all if it's health. If you fill up your health bar with superficial, then that's a -2 to all physical rolls. But if you fill up your willpower with superficial, that is a -2 to all social and mental, which is bad news for you. And then when it fills up with aggravated, that's you out, whether that is temporary or permanent. There are some situations in which superficial damage is not halved. For instance, the feral claws of the gangrel ability Protean, that does damage that is superficial but not halved. And then there are other abilities that do aggravated damage, which you can't halve anyway, from fire and the like. Here we are. Here we have finished the basic combat, and one of the big suggestions that the game makes is that to keep things going, you do 3 turns of combat. Now, in my opinion, with experience, I can say that 3 turns is often not enough to make combat lethal. So my suggestion is that you play with the bonuses, you play with the negatives to make it more or less lethal. Within 3 turns, maybe 1 or 2 vampires can go down, they can get hurt, and what the idea behind this is to keep things moving. If you do 10 rounds of combat, that can take hours, literal hours. So if you're not looking to have that experience, then you do 3 rounds, and then as a group, you kind of debate with the storyteller, you offer things that you can give up if you're losing, and you kind of decide who would win that situation. So you can either just say, well, the enemy gang is pretty beat up if the storyteller is looking at their health, or the other vampires at court are fairly cowed, you've intimidated them, or you've out curtsied them at court, that sort of thing. So you end up, as the players, winning that bout. But if there's some questions in people's minds, if the players are like, well, I'm kind of on the back foot here, people have made good arguments against my position for ending up as a primogen or whatever, or I've been stabbed a lot, the players can go, we think we might have lost. Or if they're like, we think both are in a bad place or both are in a good place, we can do one final roll-off. If you're like, we want to beat down that final gang, you pick one dice pool. The person, I would say, with the highest dice pool, I'm not sure if I'm taking this directly from the book, but the person with the highest dice pool for fighting, whether that's strength brawl, strength melee, dex athletics for throwing, composure firearms, or whether it's charisma persuasion for debating, whether it's manipulation etiquette for kind of moving the chess pieces on the court board of a ballroom in the Camarilla, whether it is either of those situations, you do one dice pool for your enemies and one dice pool for your players. They get to roll versus as a contest, and the people with the highest number win that bout, and they end up with the advantage in the situation. So, I hope that has clarified some of the basic rules for you. I'm not going to cover a lot of the advanced conflict, but if you go to page 295, it gives you various little sections and extra rules to put on top to make your combat a little bit more dynamic, whether that is a way to get an advantage in a situation, whether it is an initiative roll. So, for instance, if you are looking for this person goes first, then this person goes first, and second, then third, then fourth, if you are looking to list out, kind of like in D&D, then you can use, as the book suggests, composure plus awareness. And if you add those two together as a number, so you've got 3 composure and 2 awareness, then you are 5 good at initiative. That's your initiative number. So if there's someone with 3 and 3, they have 6. They go before you. But if there's 2 people at 5, then you can use the dexterity plus wits to roll who goes first in that initiative listing. Personally, I'm not into that. It's cool, but there's other fun stuff that I have used called Crippling Injuries. It's a list of basically a damage rating, whether you get extra aggravated damage on your damage roll. It lists what kind of consequence your player or the NPC has for that injury that they end up with, whether it's mental or whether it is physical. So one of my players crushed an NPC's hand, and then it was really cool later when I got to show them that hand creeping out of the shadows to take its revenge. It was very, well, not just the hand, the person attached to it. Anyway, it was really fun, and it adds more dynamic stuff that you can use. There's rules for grappling, which always comes up in role-playing games. But that is all on page 295 of the core rulebook in Vampire. So there are always some questions when you're going through combat, and it is a difficult situation when it doesn't cover all the bases. I don't think it possibly could cover all the minute questions that people could have, but the golden rule, as always, is if you don't like something, or if you have to decide about something, it's your game. You can do whatever the hell you like. You don't like bonuses for damage, you don't like the negatives or how they act for filling up your damage trackers, that's cool. You play the game, you and your players have the most fun doing. I have some suggestions for how to adapt the game to make it a little bit more lethal, if that's what you're looking for, and a lot quicker in some cases. So, my first one is this basic combat. It says basic, but I find it still takes up a lot of time. If you are super duper looking to speed up combat and get to the end and find your narrative results, I suggest 1 roll per player and 1 roll per NPC. Someone wants to pick a lock, they get to roll their lock picking. You go around the group. I've played with player groups of 6 to 8, and that can muddy things and bog things down real quick. So just going around the table saying, you want to do that? Cool, that's that roll. They roll the dice, either it's versus another NPC's dice pool, or it's versus a target that you make up in your head of successes. And then you go, yeah, you did that, cool, next person. 1 roll per person, speed things up immensely. And then If someone is doing something versus them, the downside to that is they will end up using that success number as their defense number. So if an NPC is trying to shoot at the person picking a lock, then, well, tough. If you didn't do great at picking the lock, you're also not going to do great at avoiding getting shot. So it is speedier, but a little bit more space for narrative backflips where you're like, you are too busy trying to avoid getting shot to pick the lock well because you took damage there. That sort of thing. And it allows you to build up a narrative of what is going on in the combat much faster. So I think the other thing to make things more lethal is not something you can do on a per combat basis, although I guess you could give people bonuses, negatives. What I would suggest, if you want things more hectic, is adapting how health and willpower are restored. So the base system is for willpower, every session or every story, you get back the higher between your composure and resolve. If you want to put on the pressure, make it the lower between the two. If you want to pile the pressure on even more, it's the lower of the two every other session or at the end of every story segment when they're like, they've finally got to the end of a mystery or something like that. That's when they get that back. So they're a little more tight with how they spend it. But on the other side of things, if you want to make them uber powerful and make them feel a bit, move things faster, make them feel more powerful, then you can be like, after every scene, you get back all your willpower. Swing it that way. Same with the health. So normally, vampires cannot restore their health just by existing. They have to use rouse checks to heal superficial, and there are limits on, I think it's once per session, use 3 rouse checks to heal 1 aggravated. And you can increase or decrease the distance of time and the amount of rouse checks if you really want to put on the pressure or relieve it in various situations. The other thing that I've noticed is the entirety of these basic conflict rules do not include powers. They don't mention them at all. Very annoying. So I would say as a general rule, if it looks like the power is intended as something to enhance a fighting roll, for example, there's a blood sorcery ability that your players can use to coat their blade in blood and make it like a poison to their enemies. I would say that happens as like an extra roll. The roll to activate that comes on top of their melee initiative stance. So they still get to stab someone in that round. But if you're like, no, you need to take an entire turn to like cut your palm and do the incantations to activate the magic in this blood, then that goes at the everything else. I would say all of these are like group decisions. You're like, nah, this takes X amount of time. But if it's like potence, where you just do a rouse check and you get bonuses to your damage for punching or melee, then I would say that doesn't even take time. That's just like a natural reaction of the vampires. These are customizable to your preference and how you think vampires work, but also narratively, it includes time for like going, ah, when you're like, I need to use potence. I don't know. If you're trying to apply powers to a social conflict, then I would say often, for instance, if you're using dominate to tell someone what to do, or if you're using dementation to, from across their the room, trying to melt their brain and make them question their decisions, and try and give them some sort of mental disability, then, I mean, I would use that as the entire part of their role. Like, that takes time and concentration, I would say. You can't also persuade the prince of something if you're concentrating on brain melting someone elsewhere. That is your entire turn. So that's what I would say. And like I mentioned, social conflict is a lot fluffier in the fact that there is no initiative. One person goes, then another person goes, and if they're doing things that oppose, when you say, this is what this person's doing, then they roll against each other as opposed to versus a target or versus a defense pool. Are there any homebrew rules that you've been using? I would love to know in the comments. I think, is that my entire list? Oh yeah, the one thing, this is kind of nitpicky, but I want to add this in as a note. So cover, or not having cover, gives you a -2 to resisting being shot unless you have celerity. But I think that it should include, there should be a rule for if you're using a gun and someone's in your knife with in your face with a knife, in your knife with a face, which is far more terrifying. If someone is in your face with a knife and you are using a gun, I would apply a -2 to the gun person's roll, to their dice pool, because it's probably difficult. Unless it's like a pistol, which, isn't going to get in the way. If it's a rifle, you're like, I don't know. That's just like my narrative brain going, you can't use a sniper rifle at short range. I don't actually know anything about guns, but that's just how it goes in my brain. And you can do the same thing. I really, really hope that this has been as clear as possible, crystal clear. Let me know in the comments, because I would love to clarify more rules, but I would also love to go through some cool homebrew stuff that I've done. I'm trying to think of it. I've actually been working on thinking about how Temporis would work. I've not written it down. I've not published it anywhere. But if that's something you're interested in, let me know. As always, a massive, huge thank you to my Patreon patrons, because they allow me to do stuff. And if you want to help by deciding what topics you'd like to see, or perhaps just gaining access to our friendly community Discord and talking about vampires, then I have the Patreon and I have awesome rewards that you can look at there. But until next time, goodbye.